I'm getting much fewer turns per video now, but that's more or less a good thing. It means I'm getting more done per turn, really. And what I obviously need now is a ship upgrade and some naval power. I've been swarming out probe ships, which are terribly useful. I haven't been exploring too much with them because the university is my neighbour and he's a great source of technology. So I've just absorbed a great wodge of technology from him. Now it's a matter of consolidating and incorporating some of that. It's a matter of building some solid ships. Get myself a bit of a navy. Even more probe boats for them to protect. And I'm very close to fully exploiting all of this continent for its resources, filling the entire area with my cities so that no one can go and park an ocean base. There's places they could park an ocean base, but they've got very limited options. It's very easy for me to police those sorts of areas. There's certainly nowhere for them to try and claim unused area of my continent anymore. Particularly now. So I'm breaking the grid a little. The horror of breaking the grid. But I want a coastal city on the tip here, and the grid wouldn't give me that. Coastal city's good for supporting naval units, which is what my next project will be until I get air power. Until I get air power, I'm developing something of a navy, mostly a defensive navy, a navy that looks after my probe boats, because probe boats are very capable of getting me all the tech in the world, quite literally. Particularly on this map, it's just given me this very watery map. So if that's how it's going to roll, then inordinate numbers of probe boats it is. I've got a decent cash buffer. If I get invaded, I can bribe an invader. I just need a navy and a headquarters that has a better energy flow. So it'll be hydroponic power for the headquarters. Forest and a river on the one square means it makes 2 energy, and that's enough to be worthwhile moving it around. Solar cells on rivers or solar cells on high areas can get me a similar amount of energy, but I don't have a lot of high areas. It's a lot of fiddling around. I find forest much easier to deal with. Don't need a lot of energy for my HQ, but because I'm running an inefficient planned empire with a sprawling array of cities, creating a lot of inefficiency, I'm not getting a lot of electrical power from my outlying cities. They are mostly just production. The only place I'm getting a decent amount of power is a few cities very close to my HQ that are getting decent efficiency, and the HQ itself. I'm pumping energy into as best I can. Yeah, those aren't good odds, but sometimes with worm combat, you can defy the odds if you go on the attack. Not in that case though. That's alright. I'll have better boats. More boats where that came from. Spend a lot of time building units and almost no time building buildings. It's something you can't do in some Civ games. Certainly something I've tried in most Civ games. Minimalism of buildings. Buildings always have upkeep, and saving on that upkeep can give you a nice wealth edge that you can use. But in this, I've got so many cities I'm going to nerve staple anyway, so the whole range of make people happy buildings, limited use. And I mean the creation, it's one morale. I sort of don't need that either because of fundamentalism. I can just manufacture elite tanks with bioenhancement. I can't make elite ships until I get the battleship tech that I don't have yet. But I'm not going to build a crash in my... I think it only applies to a unit in the city. Shows you how enthusiastic I am about some of these buildings and using them. I can barely remember what some of them do. Any building that has zero upkeep, I know how it works. And any lab multiplying, energy, cash multiplying building, I know how they work. On the who's who, I'm at the top of tech. And I'm winning overall now. So my tech looting's put me in a good position. Won't last long. I'll have to go exploring. See where everyone else is. I think the Gaians probably might have some tech, I still don't. Be interesting to see who's to the west. No. Southeast of me. I think there's someone over there. Know where Yang is, because the university knows where he is, and I stole their map. Lao is probably south or east of me somewhere as well. $32. I wonder how many I can shoehorn onto this. It's not gonna be... one more. Is that it? Is it going to be 33 cities? Oh no, I'm missing one over there. That's 33, 34 cities. That's some pretty good shoehorning, I feel. It's not a lack of cities. Assuming a certain amount of solid SMAC players are looking at my 30 whatever cities and thinking, mother of God, what is that? Because Having more than 10 cities is a little bit inefficient. Having more than 20 cities is a lot bit inefficient. Okay, yes. I need a place to stash my navy. A harbour is where you stash your navy. It's best not to forget where you stashed your navy. It's good to have harbours on each side of your country so you don't forget one of your naval stash points, let alone two. To lose one navy may be regarded as a misfortune, but to lose two seems like carelessness. Yes, there's only 2 more spots left. Then it's time for ocean bases, and I might go and occupy some of these islands, but for the most part it's going to be my mainland that my productivity will come from. Isolated bases on separate islands can not do much. They can stockpile energy and they can build spy boats. Perfectly useful. But they can't contribute to the main manufacturing process. But I will need a series of tentacles extending across the world like NATO sea bases, positioned 18 or 20 spaces apart or less, so that there's a nice sequence for me to fly down. That way I can maneuver my air power into various regions. That's always vital. Having a nearby base, needle jet base, to support whatever actions your army or navy happens to be taking in the area. Massive advantage. Boats, boats, boats. Ship 3. Commando, Trance. 3 armor, 5 weapon. Quite a solid bit of kit for the era. Don't necessarily need all worm boats, but I don't know. Worm losses. On land I'm not worried about worms at the moment, but at sea they're still one of my more potent dangers, I think. Supply crawlers without end. Okay, give them all a nice stapling. They're just not getting with the program, but the program is too important to risk. I need to clear weed out of my sea lanes. Definitely need to think about expanding my sea former power. I think I've got a couple of guys spitting out kelp. Do the same thing I do with forests. I just dot kelp around and let it expand on its own. I can infill it with more kelp later, but once I've got kelp scattered around I tend to focus on slapping a few tidal harnesses in sweet spots. There is a lot of micromanaging to be done if you're a stapler of brains, and a lot of micromanaging to be done if you're a supplier of crawlers. But I think the power of both is pretty undeniable. You get to keep a lot more of your energy when you're not supporting a bunch of happy buildings, and there's no comparison between supply crawler based productivity and regular productivity. Look at these lovely, lovely elite tanks just rolling off the production line, being reassigned a new home. Smashing bit of kit. What have I got? 10 tanks. 5 side core. What else have we got? 10 tanks is a pretty suitable amount to cover this amount of continent. 8 probe boats, also good. My impact squad used to be loyal to Lal, but since they got dumped on their own onto my vast continent to fend for themselves, I did the most merciful thing I could for the poor chaps, recruited them to my side. Couple of ships. Need to build up a better navy is the moral of this story. I seem to have enough tanks.
Production complete. Production complete. Production complete.
Got tanks scattered, I've got Psycore scattered. I feel too threatened. Yes, rivers and forest. That way if I have to go back to doing my own research, I can really crank up my labs with all this extra energy and create a decent research boost. I can even stop being fundamentalist just for a little while. Hello, Colonel Santiago has the tech. Or in other words, I should go and steal things off Santiago. Spartans. Well, I've taken all his tech, and he's terribly, terribly keen to be peaceful. And he's my neighbour. And he wanted to save his boat's skin. And he has succeeded. For I am a merciful ginger zealot, and I have turned the other cheek on his terrible, terrible tech hogging, because that's all over now. I've grabbed all his tech. I don't need to continue to annoy him for any particular purpose. I can give him a truce, let him research some shiny new toys, and then I can pop over and he can show me how to play with them. Supply crawlers rumbling into my shipyard. It seems to take 3 or 4 turns to produce one of these spanking ships, thanks to the raw mineral power of my shipyard. But that's not sufficient, so I slam in the supply crawlers, disassemble them into the ship. I can pretty much build a ship every turn. And this is my second eastern coast shipyard, where I am bioenhancing, prepping it to also pumping out a ship. As close to every turn as I can get it. That will give me a navy, because turns at this point in the game, you get a serious amount done with turns. I've got a lot of units, I can move a lot of things in a turn. It's a huge map. This is an epic undertaking. The amount of turns that have cruised by isn't so very many. The whole turn pace is slowing down, so I wouldn't want to have a bunch of factories telling me it's going to be 11 turns before I get a ship or a tank or a bomber or whatever it is that I need. I need them to pump them out snappy like. It turns out there wasn't any university on that island, but that's alright.
Production complete.
I can keep it that way.
Drone
If anyone drops
Drone
a colony pod on that island, I can hopefully bribe it before it makes a city, or bribe it after it makes a city, and use that as a way to squirm my way over there. I'll eventually get round to just taking a colony pod over there, or I might build a sea pod and shoot it past it and put it in the shallow waters on the far side. I'm mostly interested in making air and naval bases that give me good access to the university and Yang's coastlines, more so than actually exploiting the resources of that island. I think it's Mount Planet, which is mineral rich around the caldera, I think. It's quite high elevation as well, it's decent for energy. It's all very swish, but I don't really need it. I need air power, rockets, and air bases and naval bases throughout the Commonwealth. It's time to get colonial on their asses. And for that I need ships. Second last city? It's going to be 33 and then 34 down the bottom on the peninsula. That's a goodly number of core cities, I think. Gives me a nice crumple zone against nuclear weapons. Most of my valuable cities are a little bit inland. Obviously you can nuke my shipyards because they're always exposed. But down the track I may even screen them. Have some sort of a shallow water
Production complete.
cheap boat screen around each shipyard just to stop the computer from throwing nukes at me, because he will do it. They will build them and they will throw them. I built a ton of nukes once and then left a multiplayer game, and the AI took over my faction, and my neighbour, who was a human player I'd been essentially at peace with, or at least in a Cold War, promptly got instantly nuked. It picked a city where he had a bunch of his air force and navy consolidated into one city. It was in nuking range. As soon as the computer took over, just used my nukes to take out a big chunk of his military. So they're happy to be feisty. I don't know if that's an intense rivalry thing. I play it a bit without intense rivalry because their personalities are intact and I like that better. But I play it a lot with intense rivalry, which is aggressive AI. And I tend to just call it aggressive AI because intense rivalry is a bit vague. But this game has intense rivalry. So whether it's responsible for them nuking or not, it's certainly a possibility in this particular game. I'm getting 4 minerals from mines now. That's the reason you go to the trouble of making mines with roads on them. On every rocky square you can get your mitts on. least around your core homeland area. 4 minerals which you can then pipe wherever you need them through your supply crawler pipes. Everything else is forest, and it all starts out very even. It's all just 2 minerals everywhere. But forest gives you limited growth potential, but is in every other way completely smashing. Always triple check your slurping. Slurping being the official name for harvesting resources using a supply crawler. Hence they're sometimes called slurpers. And I'm used to calling them slurpers and will casually forget and definitely call them slurpers or it slurping. So I do a lot of slurping and I do a lot of slurp checking. I do a lot of bouncing into cities, checking to see that that city isn't cultivating it before I press O on the crawler. The other thing you do is you check the little readout at the bottom of the screen that tells you how many things are on a particular square. If there's another supply crawler on the same square, I don't press O just in case I create a clash of some kind between 2 forms of slurping. And that can cause a chronic hysteresis and generally destroy all of space and time. More boats. Creating an ungodly number of boats for my godly faction. The importance of having a decent amount of coastal cities at this early point in the game is a bit of control H in the coastal cities. I need a couple of cities to build the ships, and then I need a few other cities that I can float the ships into and make them home and they can support it. So that's why 30 down the bottom here got to be a coastal city, even though we had to suffer the sheer sacrilege of not maintaining the grid. Something I'm still reeling from a little. Had to break the grid before, but still, it's never easy. All praise to the grid. Seems a fairly consistent pattern there at my shipyard. Start of the turn, it'll be 3 turns from being built. If I've got some crawlers, I'll slam them in, get it down to about 1 turn, at which point it costs me 11 credits to finish it off. Hopefully I can get a similar process going in the southeast. I feel the need to overdo shipyards too is... Never had any problems with 2 shipyards. I often have 2 tank factories, 2 shipyards, 2 air factories. It's nice to have a 3rd, slower paced, specialist aircraft factory making more or less just making a bunch of interceptors and then maybe alternating between interceptors and anti-worm planes. Eco damage must go. Having an ESP anti-worm plane or 2 around, so when the worms turn up, first you see them off your coastline and hopefully send out your worm plane and just kill the Isle of the Deep before it gets to your coastline. But if it ninjas in and just disgorges a heap of worms in a gap, then your worm plane can ninja out and whittle away at the worms while your tanks are still manoeuvring into position
Request
to
confirmation.
control them. They're just a swift offensive response. I've got my Psychor, who are obviously worm defense, but in an ideal world you don't want to be defending from worms, you want to be attacking them and getting that nice little Psy attack bonus.
Request confirmation.
Boats, 11 energy, that's how it's done. Racking up a nice supply of boats. I'm still slow building tanks, but I'm not feeling compelled to create vast numbers of tanks. I'm feeling covered. Whereas having a strong navy in such a naval map is quite necessary. This guy. Repeal the UN Charter I constantly abuse and break. Why would I want you guys to be able to do that? They're all very keen on it.
Production
Lowell's
complete.
incapable of being keen on it.
Production
Everyone
complete.
else loves the idea. Dear me, they're no slouch on Transcend. They're capable of some trickiness. They have gaps in their armour. Like their air defence can be very hit and miss. Their side defence is certainly lacking. And because they respect efficiency like sensible people, there's a limit to how many cities they'll spam and what expanding they'll do, which limits them. But they're full of tricks. Repeal the UN Charter. It got passed. The Charter is repealed. My nerve stapling is no longer illegal. Maybe they just got sick of giving me sanctions. Maybe they want to be able to trade with me and be my friend. But it also applies to things like poisonous gas and nuking and using your probe teams to inflict a killer virus on a city, which has a similar effect to gassing the city. Except it can be done when there are no military units in the city, which is nasty. Maybe it can't wipe out a city completely. There's a limitation on the viral attack. It's not bad, but... So, with the Charter repealed, I need to make some poisonous gas based weapons, just in case everyone else is. And in due course I'll make some nukes, but I would have made some nukes anyway. And of course I can apply the same building technique I'm using to pump out these ships to nukes. And I can have nukes in a surprisingly short amount of turns and in some fairly terrifying numbers.
Cunning project initiated.
Always looking forward to the nuclear era. Santiago, being feisty, she's got tech that I don't in the form of rockets. Which begs the question, where are Santiago cities I want rockets? Which isn't so much a question as an imperative, but incorporates the question of where in the world is Colonel Santiago. That's what it incorporates. I need to track her down. Yes, next time. That will be my task next time. Day 39.